The first thing Nico Saviano did when he entered the Beaumont house was not look at the daughter dressed for sacrifice, but place a blood-stained shipping invoice on the silver tea tray and ask why the dead man's signature was still appearing on cargo released that morning. Nobody breathed for a second, not because they failed to understand the question, but because every chandelier in that polished Boston mansion suddenly seemed to be shining on the wrong crime. Arthur Beaumont had spent the entire evening rehearsing a different humiliation, smoothing the shoulders of his younger daughter's ivory dress, whispering that beauty could soften even a criminal's hand, ordering his older daughter Clara to stay beside the pantry door where the caterers could mistake her for help. Clara stood there in a black dress stretched over a body her father had always treated like an apology. 5'6", nearly 260 pounds, soft-armed, heavy-hipped, round-faced, and far too tired to keep folding herself smaller for a room that had never made space for her. Arthur's smile cracked before his voice did, and that small failure gave him away more clearly than any confession could have. He had borrowed $19 million from Nico Saviano, after 3 insurance companies refused to touch Beaumont Maritime, after 2 federal auditors began sniffing around the docks, after a warehouse fire turned old debt into fresh panic, and now he had prepared his prettiest daughter like a repayment plan. Vivienne stood near the fireplace with diamond pins in her pale hair, beautiful in the brittle way expensive things are beautiful when nobody has asked whether they want to be owned. Clara should have hated her for all the years of whispered jokes and stolen attention, yet the sight of Vivienne's hands shaking inside silk gloves made something old and protective tighten in her chest. Arthur gestured toward Vivienne anyway, because men like Arthur could call cruelty strategy when the furniture was expensive enough, and said, "My daughter can give you legitimacy, Nico. Marriage, access, society. She is untouched by all this." Nico did not move toward Vivienne. He stood in the middle of the blue parlor, with rain darkening the shoulders of his charcoal coat. A tall, controlled man in his early 40s, whose silence seemed trained rather than empty. His men remained behind him, one by the door, one near the hallway mirror, one watching the staircase with the bored patience of professionals who had already decided how the night would end. Nico tapped the invoice once with a gloved finger. The sound was small, but Arthur flinched as if glass had broken. "Your Pier 6 manifest released a refrigerated container at 7:12 this morning, under the authorization of Samuel Price," Nico said, his voice low enough that everyone leaned toward it despite themselves. "Samuel Price has been in the ground for 11 months. Either ghosts are handling your freight, Arthur, or someone in this house is clever enough to move cargo under a dead man's hand." Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of the pantry door, until the old brass knob pressed a crescent into her palm. She knew that invoice. She knew the false authorization, the rerouted container, the emergency correction she had made before dawn after discovering that her father's accountant had mixed legal medicine shipments with undeclared weapons meant for men who would never forgive a delay. She had not done it to save Arthur. She had done it because the refrigerated container held insulin bound for a children's hospital, and if she had let the shipment sit under federal hold, 300 boxes would have spoiled while powerful men argued over blame. She had forged the dead man's authorization, fixed the routing, buried the weapons in a container Arthur's enemies would find later, then returned downstairs to make coffee before anyone noticed she had been awake all night. Her father noticed nothing about her unless he wanted something to insult. Arthur recovered just enough to become vicious. "Clara handles household accounts," he said quickly, dismissing her with a wave that cut deeper because it was automatic. "She overreaches when lonely. Don't let her size fool you into thinking she has substance. She reads spreadsheets because no one asks her to dance." Vivienne made a tiny sound, half protest, half fear, but Arthur kept going, sweating through his collar as he dragged Clara into the open without meaning to give her power. "She is not part of my offer. She is not built for your world. Look at her." The words landed with familiar precision. Waistline, appetite, embarrassment, shadow, all the old knives sharpened by an audience. Clara lowered her eyes to the invoice, because paper had always been kinder than faces. And on that paper she saw the one detail she had not entered. A second stamp from Harbor Police Internal Review, dated 6 minutes after her correction. Someone had followed her work in real time. Nico saw her notice. That was the first moment Clara understood he had not come to choose between sisters. He had come to confirm which woman in the house could read danger faster than fear. He crossed the room slowly, not toward Vivienne's staged fragility, not toward Arthur's theatrical desperation, but toward Clara and the dark rectangle of space where she had been trying to disappear. The closer he came, the more ridiculous she felt inside her own skin, aware of her stomach beneath the dress, aware of her round cheeks warming, aware of Vivienne watching with disbelief that curdled into something sharper. Nico stopped close enough for Clara to smell cold rain, tobacco leaf, and gun oil. He placed the invoice in her hand, and instead of asking whether she had forged the release, he said, "Why did you move the insulin before you moved the guns?" The question was so exact that lying would have been an insult to both of them. Clara lifted her chin. Not far, not bravely enough to impress anyone, but enough to stop staring at the carpet her father had once told her she was too heavy to cross in heels. "Because sick children die faster than criminals lose patience," she said, and the sentence came out steadier than her hands. Arthur made a strangled noise. Vivienne whispered her name like a warning, and one of Nico's men shifted near the door, as if the room had become less predictable. Nico watched Clara for several seconds with an expression that did not soften, exactly, but sharpened around a new interest. Then he reached inside his coat. Arthur dropped to his knees before the weapon even appeared, begging so fast the words tangled together, offering Vivienne again, offering houses, art, passwords, anything except accountability. Nico drew the gun, but he did not aim it at Arthur. He pressed the cold barrel against the invoice in Clara's hand, pinning the paper to her chest with careful, terrifying gentleness, and spoke without taking his eyes off her. "Your father offered me a pretty lie in silk," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I came for the woman who can keep a dying empire breathing, while everyone calls her useless." Clara's breath caught as Arthur stared up from the rug, his face slack with a humiliation he had never imagined possible. Nico leaned closer, his voice dropping into something meant only for her. "You are leaving with me tonight, Clara Beaumont. Not as payment, not as decoration, and not as mercy." He paused just long enough for the house to creak around them, then added, "Because the federal file with your name on it goes live at midnight, and I am the only man in this city who can keep you alive. Because the federal file with your name on it goes live at midnight, and I am the only man in this city who can keep you alive." Clara did not ask him how he knew until they were already inside the armored elevator beneath the Saviano Hotel, 7 blocks from the harbor and far above the sirens that kept folding through the wet Boston streets. She had left the Beaumont house without a coat, without shoes fit for rain, without the leather notebook hidden behind the loose brick in her bedroom wall, and every missing object felt like proof that her old life had not ended cleanly, but been ripped out by the roots. Nico stood beside her in the mirrored elevator, his gun no longer visible, his hands still gloved, his expression unreadable, as the city dropped beneath them floor by floor. Clara saw herself reflected beside him, wide body, damp hair, smudged mascara she had not realized she was wearing, and for one bitter second, she wondered whether rescue always looked so much like abduction when powerful men were involved. Nico answered the question she had not yet shaped. "You are not my prisoner, unless you try to run into the arms of people already hunting you," he said, pressing a keycard against the brass panel as the elevator climbed past the public floors. "The Bureau has a sealed cooperation file built around your digital signature. Harbor Police has 2 dead informants tied to manifests you corrected. Your father's creditors think you hid their money. My enemies think you hid mine. Every man who underestimated you has now discovered you were useful, which makes you more endangered tonight than Vivienne ever was." Clara wanted to reject the words because they sounded too large for the life she had been allowed to occupy, yet her mind began arranging them against the evidence. The surprise audit notice, the missing server logs, the second stamp on the invoice, the way Arthur had changed the household Wi-Fi password after she found a strange device behind the printer. Fear did not arrive as a scream. It arrived as math. The penthouse was not romantic in the way stories made criminal luxury seem romantic. It was secure, cold, and built for a man who expected betrayal to come through glass, wiring, or blood. Bulletproof windows faced the harbor. Monitors displayed live feeds from docks and elevators, and a long black table held 3 laptops, a burner phone, a half-empty espresso cup, and a small brown envelope with Clara's name written in block letters. Nico removed his gloves and slid the envelope toward her. Inside were photographs taken from across streets and through rain-streaked windows. Clara leaving a pharmacy with insulin she bought for the Beaumont housekeeper's son. Clara standing outside Pier 6 at dawn. Clara carrying grocery bags up the back steps because Arthur said delivery men should never see what really lived upstairs. The final photograph showed her in the upstairs study 2 nights earlier, one hand on a keyboard, the other pressing a towel against her bleeding nose after Arthur slapped her for questioning a wire transfer. Something in Nico's jaw changed when she reached that photograph, but he did not perform sympathy, and she was grateful, because pity would have broken her faster than cruelty. "You watched me," Clara said, keeping her voice flat while anger moved under her skin with a steadiness that surprised her. Nico poured water into a glass and set it within reach, not close enough to crowd her. "I investigated you," he corrected. "There is a difference, though not enough of one for you to forgive quickly." That honesty unsettled her more than charm would have. She took the water because her throat hurt, then turned over the photograph and found a handwritten note on the back. "She does not know about the ledger. Keep it that way until transfer." The handwriting belonged to Arthur. The ink was blue-black, his favorite fountain pen, the one he used only for contracts and punishments. Clara read the sentence 3 times before the room seemed to tilt. "What ledger?" she asked, but Nico's eyes had already shifted to the monitor nearest the table, where a security feed showed a black sedan entering the private garage below. A woman stepped out beneath the camera, wrapped in a camel coat, blonde hair tucked under a scarf, posture too familiar for Clara's body not to react before her mind caught up. Vivienne looked smaller without the chandelier light, but not helpless. She checked the ceiling corners, spotted one camera, and lifted a folded paper toward it like a white flag. Nico's security chief, a lean woman named Maris, with a scar through one eyebrow, spoke through the intercom from the hall. "Boss, Miss Beaumont came alone, but she is wearing a wire badly enough that she either wants us to find it or wants someone else to believe she tried." Nico looked at Clara rather than issuing an order, and the shift was so unfamiliar that she almost missed its significance. Her father had made decisions about her body, her time, her food, her clothes, her usefulness. Nico, dangerous as he was, waited for her judgment, because the sister downstairs belonged to Clara's history before she belonged to his security problem. Clara set down the photograph and swallowed the old instinct to protect Vivienne from consequences she had never protected Clara from. "Bring her up," she said, hating the tremor in her voice and refusing to let it change her answer. If she came here wired, she came because someone promised her safety or threatened her with proof. Either way, she knows something Arthur didn't want me to know. Nico gave one nod to Maris. No praise, no surprise, and somehow that restraint steadied Clara more than reassurance. Vivienne entered the penthouse 12 minutes later with rain on her sleeves and terror arranged carefully across her face, but Clara saw the calculation beneath it now because fear had taught both Beaumont daughters different languages. Maris removed the wire from beneath Vivienne's collar and placed it on the table beside the espresso cup, where it blinked red like a tiny accusation. Vivienne's eyes went to Clara's dress, her bare feet, her body taking up space beside Nico's black table, and envy flashed before fear returned. "Dad said you stole from everyone," Vivienne whispered. "He said if I helped him prove it, they would leave me alone." Clara almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because Arthur's genius had always been making his children fight over crumbs while he carried away the bread. Nico stayed silent, watching Vivienne the way he watched ledgers, patient until numbers exposed themselves. Vivienne pulled the folded paper from her coat and pushed it across the table with 2 shaking fingers. It was not a confession. It was a medical bill from St. Agnes Hospital, dated 29 years earlier, stapled to an adoption intake form, and a private trust receipt under Clara's birth name, which was not Beaumont. The room narrowed around the paper. Clara saw her own date of birth, her mother's signature, Arthur's signature, and a trust funded by a woman named Helena Ward, deceased, whose estate had owned 30% of Beaumont Maritime before Arthur married into it. The ledger was not about stolen mafia money, it was about Clara. Arthur had not kept her hidden because she embarrassed him. He had kept her hidden because the fat daughter he called Ruthless was the legal heir to the docks, the warehouses, and every shipping route he had mortgaged to criminals. Vivienne began to cry harder, but this time the tears looked less rehearsed. "He is burning the paper originals tonight," she said. At Pier 6, Clara was moving before Nico spoke, grabbing the bill, the trust receipt, and the dead woman's name as if paper could become armor if held tightly enough. Nico caught her at the wrist, not hard, but firmly enough to stop panic from pretending to be courage. "Arthur wants you at Pier 6, he said. "If the originals mattered only legally, he would burn them without an audience. He needs you there because the ledger requires a living biometric release, and if your mother's trust was built into those port contracts, your thumbprint may be the last key he cannot forge." Clara looked at Vivienne, who looked away, and that was answer enough. Somewhere below them, a phone began vibrating on the table, an unknown number lighting the screen. Nico answered on speaker without greeting. Arthur's voice came through ragged and furious over the crackle of harbor wind. "Bring Clara to the warehouse, Saviano, or I start mailing pieces of her mother's ledger to the FBI with your name written all over them. Bring Clara to the warehouse, Saviano, or I start mailing pieces of her mother's ledger to the FBI with your name written all over them." Arthur hung up before anyone could answer, leaving only the soft electronic tone of the dead call and Vivienne's uneven breathing. Clara stood with the adoption papers pressed against her stomach, a gesture so old and defensive that noticing it made her furious enough to lower her hands. For 29 years, Arthur had fed her shame, because shame kept her looking down, and people looking down rarely notice locks, signatures, or the legal architecture built beneath their feet. Nico was already issuing instructions to Maris, in a voice stripped of warmth, but Clara interrupted before his plan hardened without her. "He wants a frightened daughter dragged in by a dangerous man," she said, forcing herself to look at the harbor through the rain-streaked glass. "So we give him something he understands badly enough to underestimate." The plan formed around objects Arthur had forgotten Clara knew how to use. The old Pier 6 inventory scanner that still accepted legacy port credentials, the backup server stored in the customs cage, the antique fountain pen he used for contracts, and the habit he had of locking paper records in the fireproof cabinet before destroying digital ones. Nico wanted to storm the warehouse with 8 men, remove Arthur, seize the ledger, and clean the scene before federal headlights reached the docks. It would have worked in the way violence often works, quickly, and with consequences that arrive later wearing better suits. Clara refused, because killing Arthur before exposing him would leave every lie intact. "He built my life out of documents," she said. Not dramatically, not loudly, but with a steadiness that made Vivienne stop crying. "I want him beaten by documents." Nico studied her for a long moment, then handed her a black wool coat that swallowed her dress and smelled faintly of cedar smoke. "Then we do it your way, Clara." Pier 6 looked abandoned from the street, but Clara knew abandonment could be staged as carefully as beauty. Sodium lights buzzed over wet pavement. Gulls screamed somewhere beyond the containers. The warehouse windows were black except for one yellow strip near the customs office, where Arthur had always kept the oldest files because he trusted dust more than encryption. Clara entered through the south service door with Vivienne beside her, and Nico's men ghosting the perimeter beyond the fog. Vivienne had insisted on coming, partly from guilt, partly because Arthur would never believe Clara arrived without someone smaller to use as bait. Clara did not forgive her yet, but she let her walk beside her, and that was all either sister could carry for now. Inside, the air smelled of rust, diesel, wet cardboard, and burned coffee from the vending machine Arthur had refused to replace since 2011. Arthur stood beneath a hanging work light, with a pistol in one hand and a metal storage case on the table behind him. He looked older than he had in the mansion, stripped of chandeliers and servants. A frightened man wearing authority like a costume that no longer fit. 2 hired guards flanked the office door. A third man Clara recognized from Beaumont payroll held a tablet connected to the port server, waiting for the biometric release. Arthur smiled when he saw her body filling the doorway, and even now, cornered by his own crimes, he reached for the insult that had always made him feel taller. "You should have worn something darker," he said. "Warehouses are not kind to large silhouettes." Clara let the words pass without lowering her eyes. Nico had wanted to enter behind her, but he remained outside the visible light, exactly where Clara had asked him to stay, because this part belonged to the man who raised her and the woman he failed to erase. Arthur ordered her to press her thumb to the tablet. The transfer screen showed the Ward Trust assets, dormant port shares, insurance reserves, and enough hidden equity to explain every cruelty of her childhood. Her mother had not abandoned her to Arthur's mercy. She had died, leaving Clara ownership wrapped in safeguards, and Arthur had spent decades trying to starve, shame, and isolate the one heir he could not legally replace. Vivienne made a broken sound beside her, but Clara kept watching the tablet. "You need my thumbprint to transfer the shares before the federal injunction hits at midnight," she said, and Arthur's smile faltered because he heard the accountant in her voice, not the daughter. "You also need me alive until the scanner accepts the pulse check, which means the gun is theater unless you have found a way to make dead hands authorize maritime assets." One of the guards shifted. Nico's shadow moved beyond the frosted glass, but Clara gave the smallest shake of her head. She pressed her thumb to the scanner. Arthur exhaled too soon. The tablet flashed green. The port server clicked, and across the warehouse, the old inventory printer began spitting pages with a frantic mechanical chatter that filled the room before anyone understood what she had done. Clara had not authorized the transfer. She had triggered the legacy audit protocol attached to her mother's trust, the one she found buried in the adoption documents during the drive over, and rerouted through Samuel Price's dead credentials because Arthur had never deleted anything that once saved him money. Every hidden invoice, every forged release, every bribe, every attempt to frame Clara, every payment to hired men waiting outside the warehouse loaded simultaneously to Harbor Police Internal Review, the federal receiver, 3 insurance council accounts, and Nico's secure server. Arthur lunged for the tablet, but Vivienne moved first, knocking the coffee pot from the side table into the payroll man's lap, sending him screaming backward as the device shattered on concrete. The first gunshot came from Arthur, wild and panicked, cracking into a stack of empty pallets above Clara's shoulder. Nico entered then, not like a savior arriving from nowhere, but like the consequence Clara had deliberately held at the edge of the room, until the evidence was safe. His men took the guards before they managed a clean second shot. Maris slammed one face first into the customs desk while Nico crossed the floor and put Arthur on his knees with a single brutal strike that sent the pistol skidding beneath a forklift. Clara did not look away. She had imagined this moment would satisfy some hungry place in her, but what she felt instead was colder and cleaner, like opening a window in a room where someone had been lying for too many years. Arthur spat blood onto the concrete and stared at her with hatred sharpened by disbelief. "You think he loves you?" he rasped. "Men like him collect useful things until they break." Clara stepped close enough that Arthur had to tilt his ruined face upward. For most of her life, she had mistaken cruelty for knowledge, because he delivered it with certainty. But certainty was only noise when the facts had finally been printed, copied, time-stamped, and sent beyond the reach of his matches. "Maybe he does," she said, and Nico's eyes flicked toward her. Not possessive now, not triumphant, but attentive in a way that gave the words room to exist without trapping her inside them. "Maybe he doesn't know how yet. That is not the point." She took the fountain pen from Arthur's breast pocket, the blue-black one he had used to sign away everyone but himself, and placed it on top of the printed audit stack. "The point is that you spent half your life calling me excess, while living off what my mother left me. You are not losing to a mafia boss tonight. You are losing to the daughter you trained everyone not to see." By dawn, Pier 6 belonged to receivers, lawyers, armed federal agents, and the kind of silence that comes after powerful men discover paper can bleed them drier than bullets. Arthur was taken out in handcuffs under a coat thrown over his head, not by Nico's private justice, but by the public machinery he had spent years bribing, dodging, and mocking. Vivienne sat on the curb wrapped in Clara's black coat, mascara washed clean by rain, no longer a porcelain offering, but a frightened young woman facing the cost of having survived by staying decorative. Clara stood near the warehouse door, with her bare thumb still inked from the scanner, and her feet aching inside borrowed shoes 2 sizes too narrow. Nico approached without touching her first. That restraint mattered. Everything mattered now. Every object, every pause, every choice that proved she had not traded one cage for another. "The docks are yours," he said. "The hotel lawyers can protect the trust until you choose what to do." Clara looked past him at the harbor, where the first dirty light of morning moved across cranes, water, and containers stacked like sleeping cities. She was still heavy, still soft. Still the same woman who had hidden snacks in desk drawers because eating in front of her father invited commentary. The same woman who had learned balance sheets because numbers never laughed at her body. Nothing magical had transformed her overnight, and that was what made the moment hers. She turned to Nico and held out Arthur's fountain pen. "I am not becoming your queen because you chose me in a parlor," she said. "If I stand beside you, it will be because I choose where I stand, and because you remember that seeing me once does not mean owning me forever." Nico took the pen like an oath rather than a gift. "Then, choose slowly," he said. Clara watched the city wake, knowing the girl in the pantry had not disappeared at all. She had simply stepped into the light with receipts in her hand, and this time, nobody in Boston could afford to look away.